a werewolf shifter romance written by Catherine Stewart. Prologue. You see, in the lands governed by the great shifter packs, there were two kinds of whispers these days. Two. If you knew where to listen, that is. Truth be told, most folks, they only heard the loud ones, the shiny ones. Because of that, those were the whispers of Blackstone, of Alpha Graham, and of his perfectly ordered territories. His cities gleamed, his forests stood in neat, disciplined rows, and his people, well, they never went hungry. He was the sun, they said, chasing away the shadows, a beacon of modern strength. And then, if you pressed your ear to the ancient stones or the rustling leaves at the edge of the wilder places, you'd catch the other whispers. Softer. Sadder, maybe. Moments later, you might find yourself wandering into the whisper-wind marshes. Instead of smelling like cut grass and new prosperity, the air there, it changes. It smells like old sorrow, like something stuck. The great weeping willows? Their branches hang, like grieving arms. Their leaves? Not quite the right shade of green. More a sickly yellow. As if pulled by a string, your eyes would catch the shimmer on the water, not the clean sparkle of sunlight, no, but an oily, unnatural rainbow. A sign. A tale of sickness deep in the earth. Deep down, you'd know the truth. This place is hurting. The little glowing sprites that used to dance here at twilight, gone. The moon frogs with their silver songs, silent. What's worse, sometimes the mist itself. It seems to moan. A low, unhappy sound that settles right into your bones. Why is it like this? A good question, that one. Still, life goes on in the big territories. People point to the order Graham maintains, a firm hand. They say his ancestors were wise, oh so wise, to turn away from the wild, unpredictable elemental ways of old. Because of that so-called wisdom, they insist, the truly terrible blights, the ones that can swallow whole forests or turn rivers to dust, are kept at bay. Kept at bay by Graham's strong wards, by his council's careful rules. Yet, the old folks, the ones with eyes that see more than just the surface, they shake their heads. They remember stories. Stories of a balance, a true pact with the earth and sky, the fire and water, the light and the shadow, a pact that wasn't about control, but about listening. Listening to the moon, especially. On the other hand, what do old folks know, right? Their memories are like cobwebs, easily brushed aside. But then, there are the other whispers, too. Whispers of a hidden kingdom, nestled in mountains so high they kiss the clouds. A kingdom that still listens. They call its leader the Whispering Moon King. A shadow. A myth. Some say he's a dangerous rogue, a heretic clinging to savage ways. Others, though, in voices barely louder than a breath, suggest he's a guardian, fighting a losing battle against the spreading sickness, a sickness that wears a very respectable face in the sunlit world. Who is telling the true story? Maybe it was fate that these two opposing tales existed, like two sides of a very old, very tarnished coin. More importantly, something is stirring now. The wind. It carries a different tune these nights, a restless energy. It makes the wolves howl a little longer, a little wilder. The healers, they say the moon herbs are blooming out of season, their silver petals unfurling with an urgent, almost desperate light. Not only that, but the oldest sky watchers, the ones who read the future in the silent, patient dance of the stars, they've seen a sign. A crimson tear and beginning to form in the belly of the full moon. A celestial weeping. A red moon is coming. A moon of reckoning, of great upheaval, of destinies irrevocably altered. As the silence stretched after such pronouncements, a question would hang heavy in the twilight air. When the red moon finally bleeds its full color across the night sky, what forgotten truths will be brought to light? And what new? Lady Talia of the Silverwood pack? Well, she was supposed to be happy, wasn't she? Everyone certainly said so. Before she could move into her grand new life as Alpha Graham Blackstone's Lunar, there were parties, so many dazzling parties, each one a perfect, glittering testament to the power and the prestige of their upcoming union. Tonight, the great hall of Blackstone Peak blazed like a captured constellation, all shimmering crystal and heavy gold. A true feast for the eyes. It made your breath catch. Truth be told, amidst the polite laughter and the clinking of jewel-rimmed goblets, Talia felt like a carefully chosen, very expensive ornament, polished and placed just so, for everyone to admire. Because of that, her smile, the one she practiced, felt tight on her lips. It never quite reached the deep forest green pools of her eyes. Her immediate goal tonight, as it was most nights these days, to simply endure, to navigate the sea of expectant faces, the subtle appraisals, the crushing weight of being a symbol, of perfect alliance. Deep down, she knew the truth, about her own heart. It was a wild, shy creature, beating frantically against the bars of a very beautiful, very secure cage. What did it mean, she often wondered in the quiet hours, to have everything a young lady was supposed to desire, yet to feel so profoundly adrift? Moments later, during a brief, carefully orchestrated pause in the endless parade of pack nobles and fawning dignitaries, Alpha Graham found her side. He was a striking figure, wasn't he? Tall, broad-shouldered, his presence commanding the space around him like an ancient, unshakable oak. His smile, when he chose to bestow it, was a weapon of devastating charm, the kind that made seasoned warrior women flush and rival alphas grudgingly respectful. "My dearest Talia," he began, his voice a low, smooth baritone, like stones shifting in a powerful river. "You are a vision tonight, every inch a Luna already, anticipating the strength our union will bring." And then he spoke of their future, a grand tapestry of order, legacy, and unshakable Blackstone dominance. His words painted a picture of a world meticulously controlled, perfectly managed. He mentioned the northern territories, the ones that brushed against the wild, shadowed expanse of the Whispering Woods, where those unsettling elemental blights were said to be worst. "We shall, of course, reinforce our patrols there immediately after the bonding ceremony," he declared, his gaze sweeping the hall as if already marshalling his forces. "More wards, naturally. Stronger boundaries. Absolute control, my dear." He paused, his eyes glinting. "Is the unwavering bedrock of true prosperity. You do see that, don't you? Don't?" Talia inclined her head, a graceful, practiced movement. What else was there to do when confronted with such absolute certainty? "Of course, Graham," she murmured, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. Order is paramount for peace." But then, a fleeting, rebellious thought darted through her mind, quick as a startled fawn. What if the wildness, the very chaos he sought to dominate, held an order of its own? An order far older, deeper than his stone walls and iron laws? She tried to picture their life, their future. Breakfast served at precisely 8, discussions of pack logistics and resource allocation, council meetings where her carefully considered opinions would be met with indulgent condescension, a gentle pat on the head before being dismissed. Children, if the spirits blessed them, raised to be paragons of Blackstone discipline, their wilder instincts carefully pruned, like overgrown roses. As if pulled by a string, her gaze, her very soul, it seemed, drifted towards the immense arched obsidian windows of the hall. Beyond the immaculately manicured gardens, the untamed forest pressed close, a vast, breathing darkness, full of ancient secrets, and the scent of damp earth, and moon-kissed leaves. "I was only considering," she began, her voice almost a whisper, a tentative exploration. "Perhaps the elemental spirits, if they are indeed troubled as the lore suggests, perhaps they require more than just containment? Could they, perhaps, need understanding?" Graham's answering chuckle was rich, deep, and utterly dismissive, a sound that echoed the finality of a closing door. "My dearest, sweetest Talia," he said, his hand coming to rest on her arm, a touch that felt more like an anchor than an affection. Your heart is a wonderfully soft and tender thing. Such beautiful sentiment is a credit to your gentle upbringing in Silverwood. But then, you must understand, these are not misunderstood poets, my love. These are chaotic, primal forces, remnants of a darker, far less civilized age. They demand a firm hand, a masterful hand. That's why our lands flourish under Blackstone stewardship, while others, those who foolishly cling to the old, superstitious ways, like that rumored whispering Moon King and his band of outcasts, they scratch out a miserable existence amidst decay and self-made blights. Before she could move, to voice the sudden, sharp protest that rose in her throat, before she could ask how he knew such details about a supposed myth, he was already steering her with gentle, unyielding pressure towards another cluster of influential alphas, their faces alight, anticipating greeting their future Luna. The small, wild bird in Talia's chest beat its wings against its gilded cage. Harder this time. A frantic, silent plea. This life. This gleaming, perfectly ordered future. It felt less like a haven, and more like a beautifully decorated, inescapable trap. And which, she wondered with a sudden, cold lurch of her stomach, was the greater monster, the mythical Shadow King hidden in the wild, or the celebrated Alpha whose perfectly controlled sunlight cast such very long, very dark shadows of its own? That night, cocooned in the suffocating opulence of her guest chambers at Blackstone Peak, Talia found sleep to be a cruel and elusive thing. The party, by all accounts, had been a resounding triumph. Graham, in his public role, had been the epitome of a gracious and powerful host. Yet, an insistent, gnawing unease chewed at the edges of her composure. She rose from the heavy silk sheets, the air in the room feeling thick, cloying, like overripe fruit. Walking to the expansive window, she pushed aside the heavy velvet drapes. The moon, a slender, sharp-edged crescent of purest silver, hung suspended in an ink-black sky, and the vast, brooding expanse of the whispering woods seemed to sigh beneath its ethereal light. Because of that, the hushed, almost fearful words she'd overheard earlier that day at a smaller, more intimate luncheon with some of the elder Lunas before the grand ball returned to her with startling clarity. They had spoken in lowered voices, their eyes darting, as if the very walls had ears, about the whispering Moon Kingdom. Utterly dangerous. One ancient Luna, her face a roadmap of wrinkles and anxieties, had rasped, her jeweled fingers clutching a bone china teacup. They follow a renegade, a so-called king who consorts with the raw, untamed elements themselves, ignoring the council, flouting every established law of civilized packs. Another Luna, younger but with eyes that held old fears, had shivered delicately, adding, "They say the elemental blights, those terrible sicknesses on the land, fester and grow with unimaginable speed near their hidden borders. Proof, if any more were needed, of their heretical practices. Not only that, but some of the darker tales. They whisper that this Moon King, he steals women." A shiver, sharp and cold as winter ice, had traced its way down Talia's spine then. A sensation that was not entirely uncomfortably fear. Rogue. Shadow King. Wild elements. The very words thrummed with a forbidden, dangerous music. Were these chilling tales merely designed to reinforce obedience, to underscore the shining virtue of Graham's order? Or was there a terrifying kernel of truth at their core? Maybe it was fate that these specific, unsettling stories reached her now at this precise juncture, just when the bars of her own gilded cage felt most constricting, most real. In fact, the Lunas had painted a vivid, terrifying picture of unchecked chaos and primal darkness, a world utterly antithetical to Graham's meticulously constructed vision of light, order, and controlled prosperity. They spoke with reverence of how Graham's ancestors, generations ago, had wisely and courageously broken away from such wild, unpredictable spiritualism, establishing the very foundations of the disciplined society that now kept them all safe and secure. "We must thank the Great Spirits every day for true leaders like our Alpha Graham," the eldest Luna had declared, her voice resonating with fervent conviction. "He understands, as his forefathers did, that real strength, enduring strength, is forged in discipline, in control, not in surrendering to every capricious whim of the untamed world and its shadow guardians." Despite that absolute, unwavering declaration, Talia found herself wrestling with a strange, almost treasonous pull towards the very idea of something untamed, something that lived by a different rhythm, a different truth. Was this merely the foolish, fleeting fancy of a young woman on the brink of a sensible, lifelong commitment? Or was it something far deeper, a forgotten, dormant part of her own soul stirring, recognizing a distant echo of its own lost song? She didn't know what scared her more, the lurid tales of this renegade king and his shadow court, or the suffocating, airless perfection of her own meticulously planned, entirely predictable impending marriage. The core emotional question that had begun to haunt her: where does true belonging lie? In the safety of conformity, or the perilous embrace of one's deepest, untamed self, was no longer a gentle whisper. It was a living, breathing entity within her, a seed of profound rebellion taking root in the fertile, unplowed soil of her quiet, desperate yearning. With every heartbeat, she felt the immense, crushing weight of her upcoming vows, of societal expectation, and, just as powerfully, the insistent, inexplicable pull of an unknown, unnamed, perhaps even dangerous, alternative. The elemental blights. What were they, truly? A curse of the wild, as Graham insisted? Or perhaps a symptom of a deeper wound? A sickness born of a balance broken long ago? This question, an open loop of doubt and dawning dread, began to unravel the carefully woven threads of her accepted reality. And the whispering Moon King, was he truly a monster lurking in the shadows? A heretic king leading his people to ruin? Or could he be something else entirely? That was another question, vast and unanswered, that hung heavy in the pre-dawn stillness as Talia stood before her window, watching the last stars fade, unknowingly preparing for a day that would bring not the quiet continuation of her perfectly arranged life, but the sudden, terrifying arrival of a fate she could never have envisioned. The Moon-Petal Glade, Talia's cherished sanctuary on the edge of Silverwood lands, was supposed to be a place of laughter and light-hearted farewells tonight. Her bachelorette party. One last breath of freedom, her attendants had called it, their voices bright with a forced cheerfulness she couldn't quite mirror. Instead, shadows danced with a sudden, unnerving urgency as the wind picked up. It carried the scent of pine, storm, and something else. Something wild, overwhelmingly male. Before she could move, before she could even process the sudden hush that fell over her laughing companions, he was there, a figure materializing from the deepening twilight at the glade's edge, as if summoned by the restless wind itself, more predator than man, his eyes burning with an intensity that stole the air from her lungs. Without warning, a gasp tore from Lyra beside her, a sound swallowed by the rising howl of the approaching storm. In that moment, everything tilted. Her world, so carefully ordered, so predictably safe, fractured into a million glittering shards. He moved with a speed that wasn't entirely natural, a blur of dark leather and fierce intent. There were shouts, confusion, fear, a raw, primal terror that clawed up Talia's throat. As if pulled by a string, her body tensed, her instincts screamed at her to flee, to fight. But she was frozen, caught in the electric current of his gaze. "Talia of Silverwood," his voice was a low growl. a rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very earth beneath her feet. "You will come with me. Now." It wasn't a request. Truth be told, it was a command wrapped in the velvet darkness of an ancient power. Panic, cold, sharp. It finally broke her paralysis. She stumbled back, her hands flying to her mouth. "No, who are you? What do you want?" But then, her words were lost as he closed the distance, in 2 impossible strides. Her body moved on instinct, or perhaps it was her wolf, that slumbering, almost forgotten part of her, trying to shield her. Without thinking, she raised a hand as if to ward him off. His larger, calloused hand closed around her wrist, not crushing, but with an unyielding strength that brooked no argument. The moment their eyes locked, truly locked, something elemental arced between them. A shock, a jolt, a terrifying flicker of recognition that resonated deep in her bones. It wasn't just a physical capture, it felt like a claiming. As if fate demanded it. The storm broke then. Rain lashed down in icy sheets. Wind whipped her hair across her face, blinding her. He pulled her close, effortlessly lifting her as if she weighed nothing. And just like that, everything changed. The familiar scents of moon petals and her friend's perfumes were ripped away, replaced by the wild, intoxicating aroma of him, storm, ancient forest, and a fierce, undeniable masculinity. Her old life vanished in a whirlwind of darkness and the thunderous roar of his departure, leaving behind only screams and the growing tempest. What followed was a dizzying, terrifying journey. She didn't know what scared her more, the iron grip of the man who held her, or the almost supernatural way he moved through the raging storm, as if the wind and rain were his willing accomplices. Eventually, just as exhaustion threatened to pull her under, they arrived, a cabin, small, stone-built, nestled so deep within the howling forest it felt like the last outpost of the world, or perhaps the first outpost of a world she never knew existed. As the wind shifted, he finally set her down inside, the air thick with the scent of damp earth, wood smoke, and his own potent nearness. The door slammed shut behind them, a sound of utter finality against the storm's fury. Beneath the moonlight that intermittently pierced the raging clouds through a small grime-streaked window, Talia backed away, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. "Why?" she choked out, her voice tree. What followed was a dizzying, terrifying journey. She didn't know what scared her more, the iron grip of the man who held her, or the almost supernatural way he moved through the raging storm, as if the wind and rain were his willing accomplices. Eventually, just as exhaustion threatened to pull her under, they arrived. A cabin, small, stone-built, nestled so deep within the howling forest it felt like the last outpost of the world, or perhaps the first outpost of a world she never knew existed. As the wind shifted, he finally set her down inside, the air thick with the scent of damp earth, wood smoke, and his own potent nearness. The door slammed shut behind them, a sound of utter finality against the storm's fury. Beneath the moonlight that intermittently pierced the raging clouds through a small, grime-streaked window, Talia backed away, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. "Why?" she choked out, her voice trembling. "Why have you done this?" He stood by the door, a silhouette against the stormlight, water dripping from his dark hair and leather-clad shoulders. He was a king. She knew it somehow, even before he spoke. Not a king of courts and pleasantries, no, but of something older, wilder, the Whispering Moon King. It had to be him. Despite that terrifying realization, a strange new sensation was uncurling within her. Not just fear, but a raw, unwilling awareness. As the silence stretched, broken only by the storm and their ragged breaths, he finally spoke, his voice still that low, resonant growl. "Because you are mine, Talia. Because our destinies were woven together, long before either of us drew breath. because your wedding to Graham Blackstone cannot happen. Each because was a hammer blow, a shock to her understanding of reality. Her world tilted again. Mine? She whispered, shaking her head. I belong to no one. I am to be Graham's Luna. Maybe it was fate that her voice found a shred of defiance. In fact, she felt a spark of her pack's pride ignite within her, pushing back against the terror. On the other hand, the way he looked at her, it wasn't the look of a mere kidnapper, a brute. No. Under the weight of his stare, she saw a deep, almost sorrowful conviction, an ancient weariness, and something else, a fierce, possessive fire that both terrified and intrigued her. No matter how hard she tried to cling to her outrage, a different question began to form. What if he wasn't entirely mad? What if some part of his impossible claim held a truth her soul, on some level, recognized? More importantly, how could this man, this Shadow King from Forbidden Tales, speak of her destiny with such burning certainty? An open loop, a terrifying question mark, now hung over her entire existence. He took a step towards her then, his movements fluid, powerful. With every step he took, the small cabin seemed to shrink, the air crackling with an unseen energy. Graham Blackstone, Alec stated, his voice now edged with something hard as glacial ice, is not what he seems. The order he offers your world is built upon a lie, a sickness that poisons the very elements. And you, Talia, you are more than just a political prize in his games. Her breath caught. What did he mean? What sickness? And what could she possibly be to either of them, beyond a bride to be bartered? Before either could speak, further, a distant sound pierced the storm's roar, a chorus of howls, organized, hunting, Graham's wolves, already. Her heart skipped, a beat, then another. Rescue? Or something else? Alec's head snapped up, his eyes, which she now saw held flecks of silver like moonlight on dark water, narrowed. They are quick, he murmured, more to himself than to her. And then, he turned back to Talia, his expression unreadable. You heard them. Your fiancé comes for his property. The words were a deliberate sting. You have a choice, Lady Talia. A fleeting one. You can attempt to run to them now. The storm is your only cover. I will not stop you. Though I tell you plainly, to return to Graham is to embrace a gilded cage built on shadows and decay. A future where your true spirit will wither. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in, the howls growing faintly louder. As the silence roared in the tiny cabin, he offered the alternative. Or, you stay. You listen to the truth I offer, a truth about him, about me, about us, and about the ancient vendetta that binds all our fates, a truth that may save more than just your own soul. In the stillness that followed, the choice hung heavy, sharp as a wolf's tooth, the safety of the known lie, or the perilous uncertainty of an almost unbelievable truth. This was the precipice. Her core emotional question screamed for an answer, not in quiet contemplation, but here, now, with her world in flames. In the quiet that followed, Talia's fragile, unspoken decision to stay, to listen, the storm outside seemed to take a breath, its fury momentarily hushed, as if waiting, just like her. Alec, the whispering Moon King, watched her. His silver-flecked eyes held no triumph, only a deep, ancient weariness, and a flicker of something else. Hope? Maybe it was fate, that the loudest roar now came not from the wind, but from the frantic thumping of her own heart. He finally moved then, not towards her, but to the small crackling hearth, adding a piece of dry pine. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, at his nearness, he began to speak, his voice a low rumble, weaving a tale that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. Our world, Talia, he started, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames, is not just earth and stone, wolf and man. It breathes with elemental spirits, ancient, powerful. Once, long ago, our ancestors, mine and Graham's, understood this. They were co-guardians of a sacred pact. A pact? She found herself whispering, the word foreign on her tongue. Because of that. Question. A small, almost imperceptible softening occurred around his stern mouth. Yes, Alec continued, his voice taking on a cadence like an old saga. A covenant of balance. We, my line, the moon line, we communed with the wilder, more intuitive energies, the storm's fury, the night's secrets, the deep earth's hidden heart. Graham's ancestors, the sun line, they focused on structure, on the land's bounty, on the sun's unwavering order. Together, we maintained harmony. And then, he told her of the Great Dimming, a terrible time centuries past, when a celestial event, or perhaps a treachery of the spirit world itself, caused the elemental energies to falter, to sicken. The land wept, blights appeared. Truth be told, fear gripped all the packs. Graham's ancestors, Alec said, his voice now laced with a cold, hard bitterness that resonated with the cabin's chill. They were ambitious, clever. They used the fear. They twisted the narrative. He turned to face her fully then, his eyes like chips of ice in the firelight. They blamed my people. They called our connection to the wilder elements a perversion, a summoning of darkness. They named us heretics. As a result, they seized sole control of the pact, promising a new age of order, of safety. Talia listened, her mind reeling. Skepticism warred with a strange, unsettling sense of recognition. The stories from the old Lunar, the whispers of Graham's unshakable order. Could it all be built on such a monumental lie? And the fated bond you spoke of? She asked, her voice barely audible. What does that mean in this world you describe? Alec's gaze softened again, just a fraction. More importantly, he took a step closer, the scent of pine and storm filling her senses. For shifters like us, Talia, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, heavy with significance. A fated mate is not a fancy, not a choice. It is the other half of our soul. To deny it, to lose it, it is a slow death of the spirit. The wolf within fades. Madness can take hold. That's why I could not let you bind yourself to him, to that lie. He paused, and, in the span of a breath, the air between them thickened. And for a king of my line, a fated mate. She is the key to restoring our people's full strength, to healing the imbalance he has wrought. Her world tilted. Key? What did that mean? An open loop of terrifying possibility. No matter how hard she tried to remain detached, his words, his raw conviction, chipped away at the fortress of her old beliefs. This was not just a madman's rant. This was the desperate plea of a king, a culture, on the brink. The core emotional question echoed again. Was this perilous, unbelievable tale a path to true belonging, or just a deeper, wilder kind of cage? Come morning. The storm had somewhat abated, though the world outside the cabin's small window was still a canvas of swirling gray and angry, whipping trees. Because of that, their isolation felt even more profound. The small store of dried rations Alec had in the cabin was dwindling. Soon after, Talia awoke from a restless sleep, filled with fragmented dreams of shadowy wolves and whispering forests. Alec announced, I must hunt. The storm provides cover from Graham's patrols, but we need food. Before she could move to protest or question, he was already checking the cabin's simple, heavy door. She didn't know what scared her more, being left alone in this wild place, or the thought of him venturing out into that tempest, perhaps to face Graham's trackers. Be careful. The words slipped out, unbidden, small and fragile in the tense air. A beat later, His eyes met hers, and for a fleeting second, she saw something beyond the king, beyond the fierce warrior, a flicker of surprise, perhaps even gratitude? But then, it was gone, replaced by his usual guarded intensity. "The cabin is warded," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Nothing should find you here easily. Stay inside. Keep the fire low." And then, he was gone, melting into the gray fury of the storm like a phantom. Meanwhile, left alone, Talia felt a strange mix of emotions. Fear, yes, but also a burgeoning curiosity, a reluctant admiration for his raw competence, his seeming oneness with this wild, untamed world. On the other hand, what if he didn't come back? What if Graham's wolves found him? What if they found her? To make things worse, a sudden, unnatural tremor shook the cabin's stone floor, a brief but violent shudder that sent a cascade of dust from the ancient rafters. The fire in the hearth sputtered, its flames momentarily turning a sickly, unsettling green. Her breath caught. An elemental breach? Was this the sickness Alec spoke of? Graham's corruption made manifest. Her body moved on instinct, scrambling away from the hearth, her heart hammering. This was real. Not just stories, not just a king's desperate plea. The danger was here, tangible, and she was utterly alone. The carefully constructed order of her past life felt a million miles away, a fragile dream shattered by a terrifying elemental truth. At the same time, as that unsettling tremor, Talia thought she heard it again. Faint, far off, but distinct this time. The disciplined hunting call of Blackstone wolves, closer now. Or was it just the wind playing tricks on her frayed nerves? Her thoughts spun. She was a lady of Silverwood, promised to the most powerful alpha in the territories. She should be yearning for rescue, for Graham's strong arm, for the return of order. Yet, the image that flashed in her mind was not of Graham's reassuring smile, but of Alec's silver-flecked eyes, burning with a fierce protective light as he'd faced the storm. Something inside her shifted. The fear was still there, cold and sharp, but it was now mingled with a new, unwelcome emotion. A reluctant concern for her captor, for the rogue king who claimed her as his fate. What followed was an agonizing wait. As the silence stretched, thick and heavy save for the wind's mournful song, Talia paced the small cabin like a caged animal. Every shadow seemed to lengthen. Every creak of the old timbers sounded like an approaching footstep. With every heartbeat, she expected the door to burst open, revealing either Graham's righteous fury or Alec's. Well, what of Alec? Maybe it was fate that pushed her towards the cabin's single grime-streaked window. Peering out, she saw nothing but the relentless swirling gray. But then, just as a fresh wave of despair threatened to engulf her, a movement at the edge of the tree line. Not the disciplined advance of Blackstone warriors. Something else. A lone figure, dark and powerful, moving with a predator's grace through the howling wind. A brace of snow hairs slung over his shoulder. Alec. He was back. Her chest ached, with a sudden, sharp relief so intense it almost felt like pain. He was alive. He was safe. And the realization of how much that mattered to her in this short, terrifying span of time was perhaps the most unsettling tremor of all. He was her captor, her enemy by all rights. So why did his return feel less like a renewed threat, and more like a fragile, dangerous kind of hope? The lines of her world were not just blurring. They were being entirely redrawn by a hand she was only just beginning to recognize as fate. In the stillness that followed, Alec's return, a fragile truce seemed to settle in the small, storm-battered cabin. The snow hairs he'd caught roasted over the now steady fire, their savory scent a small comfort against the wildness outside, and the even wilder turmoil inside Talia. Because of that shared meal, a little bit of the ice around Talia's heart began to melt. Alec, maybe it was fate, seemed to sense this shift. Soon after they had eaten, while the wind still howled a mournful song around the eaves, he began to speak again, his voice a low thrum against the storm's percussion. He didn't just talk about battles or betrayals this time. Instead, he spoke of his hidden kingdom, the Whispering Moon, a place, he said, where the elemental spirits weren't just acknowledged, but were woven into the very fabric of their lives. "We don't seek to control them, Talia," he explained, his silver-flecked eyes holding a deep, almost reverent light. "We seek to harmonize, to listen. Truth be told, Graham's lineage, they see power only in dominion, in bending things to their will. As a result, the very land under their control, it sickens. It forgets its true song." He showed her a small, intricately carved wooden box he carried. Before she could move, to ask, he opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of dried moss, lay a single, smooth gray stone, no bigger than her thumb. It looked unremarkable. Yet, as Alec held it out, a strange warmth pulsed from it, a faint thrumming energy that vibrated up Talia's arm when he gestured for her to touch it. "This," Alec said, his voice hushed, "is a whisper stone. It's attuned to the deep earth spirits of my homeland. My ancestors used them to listen to the heart of the mountain, to feel its joys, its sorrows." As if pulled by a string, Talia reached out a hesitant finger. The moment her skin grazed its cool, surprisingly vibrant surface, a tiny shock, like a spark of static on a dry night, jolted through her. And then a fleeting image flashed behind her eyes, a sun-drenched glade, ancient trees with silver leaves, and a feeling of profound peace. It vanished as quickly as it came, leaving her gasping, her heart pounding. What was that?" Alec's eyes narrowed, searching hers with a new, piercing intensity. Deep down, she knew the truth, that something extraordinary had just happened. "You felt it?" he asked, his voice tight. "You felt the stone's echo?" Talia could only nod, her throat suddenly dry. That is not common, Talia. Not for those outside my lineage. Not unless—" He trailed off, a look of dawning wonder, and perhaps a new kind of fear on his face. More importantly, this unexpected connection, this shared secret, seemed to draw them closer, the air in the small cabin thickening not just with wood smoke, but with an unspoken, powerful current. What did it mean that she could feel this stone? And what other forgotten parts of herself were stirring in response to this rogue king and his wild, elemental world? Her thoughts spun, a dizzying mix of fear and a strange, exhilarating anticipation. The path before her was becoming more perilous, yet more compelling. With every revelation, what followed was a period of intense, whispered conversations, the storm outside their only confidant. Alec, because of that, shared experience with the Whisperstone, began to see Talia not just as his fated mate, but as something more, something pivotal. He spoke of an old prophecy within his kingdom, a half-forgotten verse that foretold the coming of a daughter of silvered light, whose dormant elemental resonance held the key to reawakening the true pact, or else in the wrong hands could be used to shatter it completely. The moment their eyes locked. As he spoke these words, Talia felt a cold dread mix with a dawning, terrifying understanding. "My lineage," she breathed, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. "Silverwood, silvered light." As if fate demanded it, just as this monumental realization settled upon them, a faint, crackling disturbance broke the cabin's wards. A magical interference. Alec was instantly alert, a low grrrl rumbling in his chest. "Graham's sorcerers," he snarled, his eyes blazing with a protective fury. "They're trying to scry for you. He knows you're more than just a runaway bride." In that moment, the midpoint shift occurred. The true game changing. Using a dangerous counter magic, drawing on the cabin's inherent elemental energies and a small, almost forgotten trick his grandmother had taught him, Alec managed to briefly intercept and decipher a fragment of the sorcerer's communication meant for Graham. As the truth unraveled, before them, spelled out in flickering, ugly magical script only Alec could fully read aloud, Talia's blood ran cold. Graham wasn't just angry about a broken alliance. He wasn't just hunting a stolen bride. The message spoke chillingly of securing the asset, of Talia's unique lineage properties, and of the imminent celestial alignment needed for a final consecration. Her world tilted. She wasn't a prize, she was a component, a key, a sacrifice. Not only that, but the message hinted that Graham knew of her latent elemental sensitivity, perhaps even more than she herself understood. She felt it, clear as day. The safety Graham offered was the safety of a specimen in a jar, her value only in what he could extract from her. On the other hand, Alec, seeing the stark terror and dawning fury on her face, did not shy away. Instead, his hand found hers, his grip strong, grounding. "Now you see," he said, his voice a raw whisper, his eyes blazing with a shared understanding. "Now you see why I could not let him have you. This is not just about a fated bond, Talia. This is about the soul of the land, and you are at the very heart of it." Between them, something cracked. The last vestiges of her old world's conditioning, the last threads of her doubt about Alec's desperate actions. He wasn't just her fated mate. He was, in a terrible and profound way, her only true protector, against a monstrosity she had almost willingly bound herself to. Her instincts surged. The need to fight, to survive, to protect whatever power lay dormant within her from Graham's defiling touch, became a roaring inferno soon after. This devastating revelation, the immediate danger from the scrying attempt passed, but the atmosphere in the cabin remained thick with a new urgency. Because of that, new knowledge, the need to reach Alec's hidden kingdom, to find safety and answers, became a burning imperative. Talia found herself looking at Alec with new eyes. The fear was still present, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was now overlaid with a fierce, almost desperate resolve, and a dawning, terrifying awareness of her own potential significance. As the sky darkened, outside, promising another night of storm and uncertainty, Alec finally voiced the full horror of Graham's likely plan. "The final consecration," he explained, his voice grim, his face etched with shadows in the firelight. "It's an ancient, forbidden ritual. It involves binding an elemental spirit of immense power, corrupting it, and chaining it to the Alpha's will. To do so with a spirit of the magnitude Graham seeks, it requires a pure conduit, a bloodline with a deep, untainted elemental resonance, to channel and then shatter. That, Talia, is what he believes you are." Her breath caught. To be a vessel, then a sacrifice, for such an abomination. The sheer calculated evil of it stole her words. And just like that, everything changed. Again. The fight was no longer just for her freedom, or even for her fated love with Alec. It was a fight to prevent a sacrilege that could irrevocably scar the world, with her own soul as the intended instrument of its desecration. In the quiet that followed, Alec's grim explanation of the final consecration, a new kind of silence fell upon the cabin, not the silence of the storm, no, but the heavy, breathless stillness before a lightning strike. Truth be told, Talia felt as if the very floorboards beneath her feet had vanished, leaving her suspended over an abyss of horrifying understanding. Her lineage, a pure conduit, a sacrifice. Because of that monstrous revelation, a cold, hard fury began to smolder deep within her, a feeling so intense it burned away the last vestiges of her fear, her doubt. She didn't know what scared her more anymore, Graham's power, or the thought of what would happen if she didn't fight. Moments later, her gaze fell upon the small battered satchel Alec had brought, the one containing the aged documents and the coded leather-bound journal he'd recovered from his enemies. Before, she'd felt a hesitant, unnerving pull towards them. Now, it was a burning compulsion. "The texts you found, Alec," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, a newfound steel lacing its soft tones. "The ones you couldn't fully decipher. May I see them again?" As if pulled by a string, he nodded, his eyes searching hers, seeing the shift, the hardening of her resolve. He retrieved the satchel, his movements careful, almost reverent. And then, for hours, with the storm still a distant murmur and the firelight casting long, dancing shadows, Talia pored over the brittle pages. The script was archaic, filled with strange symbols and elemental ciphers. But then, as she touched them, as she allowed that strange, dormant elemental sensitivity within her to awaken, to listen to the ancient ink, the meanings began to unfurl. It was like her bones remembered him, or rather, remembered this language, this forgotten lore. Fragments of truth, sharp as obsidian shards, pieced themselves together. The full, unadulterated horror of Graham's and his ancestors' ambition. Deep down, she knew the truth was far worse than even Alec had suspected. "It wasn't just a blame game, Alec," she finally whispered, her voice raw, her face pale in the flickering light. Her thoughts spun as she tried to articulate the magnitude of the deceit. Your ancestors, the moonline, they didn't just fail to stop the great dimming. This scroll, it says Graham's forebears caused it. They deliberately unbalanced the elemental spirits, creating the catastrophe to seize power. Not only that, she continued, her finger tracing a particularly chilling passage. Graham isn't just maintaining a lie. He's actively feeding the sickness. He's draining the sacred elemental sites, the very ones your people protect, to amplify his own corrupted power, and me." Her voice broke. "My lineage. It's not just a conduit he needs. It's a final key to unlock something truly ancient, something they call the heart of the fallen star. He believes binding it through my bloodline, under the right celestial alignment, will grant him godlike control. And in doing so, he'll complete the genocide. He'll sever the moonline's connection to the land, to the spirits, forever." The air thickened. The full, monstrous weight of it settled upon them, as if the world narrowed to just the two of them and this horrifying truth. Talia looked at Alec, her eyes blazing. "He has to be stopped." It wasn't a question. It was a vow. That night, as if summoned by the gravity of their discovery and the silent, screaming plea of the wounded land, the red moon began its ascent. It was a rare, almost mythical celestial event, one spoken of in Alec's kingdom's oldest prophecies, a moon that amplified elemental magic, that illuminated hidden truths, and that often heralded immense, irrevocable change. Beneath the moonlight, which painted the interior of the cabin in eerie crimson hues, the air grew charged, alive, with an almost unbearable tension. Alec stood before Talia, the raw power of his alpha nature, his connection to the wild elements, thrumming visibly around him. "The red moon, Talia," he said, his voice a low, guttural rumble that vibrated through her very core. It changes things. It empowers my lineage. But it is also a time of great risk, of destinies irrevocably sealed. Under the weight of his stare, she felt her own nascent elemental sensitivities stir, a wild, exhilarating fire blooming beneath her skin in response to the moon. To him, the fated bond between them, already a powerful undercurrent, now surged like a tidal wave. Maybe it was fate, or maybe it was the raw, desperate need born from the horrors they had just uncovered. But all pretense, all hesitation, vanished. The space between them burned. This wasn't just desire, though that was there, a sizzling, undeniable force. More importantly, it was about defiance. It was about forging their souls together as an unbreakable shield against the coming darkness. It was about claiming their fate before Graham could steal it. As the bond pulsed, a tangible living thing connecting them, his name was a silent prayer on her lips. Without another word, he closed the distance. His touch, electric, branding her skin, awakening every nerve ending. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, their consummation was not gentle. It was a storm, a desperate, passionate claiming under the watchful, blood-red eye of the moon, a sacred, elemental ritual of their own. Sealing their vows not in a grand hall with empty words, but here, in this wild place, with their very souls as witness. In that moment, they were king and queen, warrior and mage, two halves of a prophecy finally made whole, their union an unknowing, powerful invocation against the encroaching night. And she let it happen, this wild, beautiful, terrifying merging, because deep in her bones, her soul answered his. But then, just as a fragile piece, a sense of profound, almost spiritual completion began to settle over them in the crimson-soaked aftermath. A jarring, unnatural silence fell outside. The storm, which had been their constant companion, died, abruptly. As the silence roared, a different sound pierced the sudden stillness, the sharp, metallic clang of weapons, the disciplined crunch of many paws on snow, closer than they had ever been. Without warning, the cabin's ancient wards, already strained, flared with a sickening green light whir and then shattered. Her breath caught. Graham, he had found them. To make things worse, the sheer force of his arrival, the palpable wave of corrupted elemental energy that preceded his soldiers, was terrifying. He sensed it. Alec snarled, already moving, pulling Talia behind him, his body a sudden, hard shield. He sensed the Red Moon's power. And us. There was no more time for whispers, for revelations. The fight, the one they knew was coming, was no longer a distant threat. It was here, at their very door. And just like that, everything changed, from a desperate hope to a desperate, immediate fight for survival. The point of no return had been a passionate embrace. Now, it was the cold steel of an impending battle. What followed was a desperate flight, the acrid scent of shattered wards and Graham's corrupted magic clinging to them like a shroud. Alec, a fierce, protective inferno at Talia's side, carved a path through the disoriented attackers immediately around the ruined cabin, his strength fueled by the Red Moon's lingering power and the desperate need to get Talia, his mate, his queen, to safety. Truth be told, Talia barely remembered the chaos of their escape, only the bite of the icy wind, the sting of pine needles against her face, and Alec's hand, a warm, unshakable anchor in hers. They ran, didn't they? Ran, until her lungs burned, and her legs screamed in protest. Because of that. Relentless pace, she thought, just for a fleeting moment. They might actually make it, might find a hidden trail, leading to the sanctuary of his whispering moon kingdom. But then, as they broke through a thicket of snow-laden firs into what seemed like a small sheltered clearing, the world exploded. Again. Without warning. Shadows detached themselves from the deeper woods, Graham's elite hunters. Not the disorganized rabble from the cabin, no. These ones moved with a chilling, silent precision, an ambush. Before she could move, to scream a warning, Alec shoved her, hard, sending her sprawling behind a snow-covered outcrop of rock. And then he turned, a magnificent, terrible figure of a king at bay, to meet the charge. In that moment, Talia saw it all unfold with horrifying clarity, the glint of dark, envenomed silver on a crossbow bolt. A weapon specifically crafted, she knew with sudden, sickening certainty, to cripple an elemental alpha of Alec's line. It flew true. Her heart skipped. A beat. Then two. Alec roared, a sound of pure, untamed fury that shook the very air, swatting one attacker away like a bothersome fly. Even so, another bolt, then a third, found their mark. He stumbled, his roar turning into a guttural cry of pain, his eyes, those beautiful silver-flecked pools, glazing over for a terrifying instant. As if pulled by a string, Talia scrambled up, her own small hunting knife, a forgotten gift from her father, suddenly in her hand. But the attackers were on him, a wave of dark fur and gleaming fangs. To make things worse, the precious satchel containing the ancient texts, the vital proof of Graham's villainy she had clutched so tightly, was torn from her grasp in the melee, kicked away into the deepening snow by a retreating hunter as they, having done their primary damage, melted back into the forest as quickly as they'd appeared. Gone. The proof was gone. Moments later, or perhaps it was an eternity, the clearing was silent again, save for Alec's harsh, ragged breathing and Talia's own choked sobs. As the silence stretched, she crawled to him, her hands shaking so violently she could barely unfasten the clasps of his torn leather jerkin. The dark silver bolts, lodged deep in his shoulder and thigh, an ugly blackish ooze already seeping from the wounds, the poison specifically designed to sever an elemental shifter's connection to their power, to their very life force. "Alec! Oh, spirits, Alec!" she cried, her voice a broken whisper. Deep down, she knew the truth. This was bad. Very, very bad. His skin was already cold, his breathing shallow. Her thoughts spun in a vortex of terror and guilt. The texts were lost, Alec was dying, and it was all her fault. If she hadn't been there, if he hadn't needed to protect her. No matter how hard she tried, to staunch the bleeding, to whisper frantic, useless words of comfort, the darkness was claiming him. His strength, which had seemed as boundless as the forest itself, was ebbing away, like the tide. Somehow, driven by a strength she didn't know she possessed, Talia managed to drag Alec, an almost dead weight now, away from the exposed clearing. She didn't know what scared her more, the thought of Graham's hunters returning, or the chilling stillness of the man beside her. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity of stumbling through the snow and unforgiving undergrowth, her body moved on instinct, finding a shallow cave hidden behind a curtain of frozen ivy, a place barely big enough for them both, rank with the smell of damp earth and old animal dens. That night, huddled against Alec's chilling form, desperately trying to share her own meager body heat, Talia felt a despair so profound, it was a physical ache in her chest. The fire she managed to coax from damp twigs was small, pathetic, offering little comfort against the biting cold, or the even colder fear gripping her heart. She tried to use her nascent elemental sensitivities, the ones that had sparked to life when she touched the Whisper Stone, to draw warmth from the earth, to soothe his pain, to call for help. But then, nothing. Her abilities, so new, so fragile, seemed to have deserted her. Or perhaps they simply shattered against the overwhelming tide of her terror and grief. What's worse, a new, terrifying realization began to dawn within her own body. A subtle shift, a deep internal awareness she hadn't recognized amidst the chaos. The red moon, their union. She felt it, clear as day. She was pregnant, carrying Alec's child. Here, now, with him dying beside her and their enemies closing in. The irony. A cruel, bitter twist of the knife. A new life, conceived in an act of fated defiance, now faced almost certain doom before it even had a chance to begin. Come morning, Alec was still alive, his breathing a faint, shallow whisper. But the poison was clearly taking its toll. He was feverish, lost in delirious mutterings, sometimes calling out names she didn't recognize, names perhaps from that lost life, that stolen heritage Graham had tried to erase. Once his eyes fluttered open, unfocused, and he looked at her, a flicker of confusion, of pain. "Camilla?" he rasped, his voice thick, mistaking her for someone else, someone from a past filled with a sorrow she could only guess at. The name hung in the air, a ghost between them, and her chest ached. With a fresh wave of despair. Not only was he dying, but in his delirium, he didn't even see her. She was alone, utterly, completely alone, with a dying king, a lost cause, and a secret life growing within her. As the echo faded, from his weak voice, Talia felt something inside her break. This was it then. Her all-is-lost moment. The core emotional question of where true belonging lay seemed a mockery now. She had chosen the perilous embrace of her untamed self, of this fated love, and it had led only to this: a frozen cave, a dying mate, lost hope, and the chilling certainty of Graham's inevitable triumph. In the stillness that followed, she closed her eyes, the cold seeping into her bones, mirroring the icy despair in her soul. The fight was over. Graham had won, and all that was left was to wait for his wolves to find them and end it. In the stillness that followed, Talia's descent into utter despair, with the icy breath of defeat on her neck and Graham's wolves circling ever closer, something truly unexpected happened. As the silence stretched, taut and fragile as a spider's thread, Talia, huddled over Alec's chilling form, closed her eyes. She wasn't praying. Not really. Instead, it was a raw, silent scream from her soul. A desperate, unformed plea shot into the heart of the ancient, listening forest around their pathetic excuse for a cave. Her hand instinctively pressed against the cold, damp earth beneath her. And then, a tremor. Not like the sickly shudder of the cabin before. No, this was different. Deeper. Without warning, the ground beneath them seemed to hum, a low, resonant vibration that grew in intensity. Before she could move, before Graham's scouts at the cave mouth could react, the very air crackled. Thick, thorny vines, ancient and strong as iron, erupted from the frozen earth around the cave entrance, twisting, lashing with furious speed, forming an almost impenetrable barrier. The surprised yelps and snarls of Graham's wolves were abruptly cut off, followed by frustrated howls from beyond the sudden living wall. Just like that. They had a reprieve, a miracle. Her heart skipped a beat, then hammered against her ribs with a wild, disbelieving hope. Because of that impossible intervention, her eyes flew to Alec. He was stirring. His own eyes, though still clouded with pain and fever, now held a spark of fierce, familiar light. The land. Talia? He rasped, his voice a dry whisper. Did you... She could only shake her head, tears streaming down her face now. Tears not of despair, but of a strange, terrifying, exhilarating awe. She didn't know what scared her more, the power that had just answered her silent plea, or the sudden fierce surge of determination that now blazed through her veins. Maybe it was fate, or maybe it was the desperate, protective love for Alec, for the tiny life nestled within her. But the ice around her heart shattered. The fight wasn't over. Not yet. As if summoned by this renewed hope, faint answering howls echoed from deeper within the mountains, different from Graham's disciplined hunters. Wilder, freer, Alec's people. The tension broke, replaced by a fragile, desperate lifeline. Soon after, Alec's warriors found them, guided by the unusual elemental surge and their king's faint, thready call on the pack bond. They were fierce, loyal, their faces grim but resolute as they saw their injured king and the unexpected thorny barricade. What followed was a swift, silent extraction, deeper into the mountains, towards a hidden sanctuary, an ancient elemental glade sacred to the Whispering Moon Kingdom, a place Graham's corrupted trackers could not easily find. Truth be told, Talia barely remembered the journey, her focus entirely on Alec, who, though weak, held onto her hand with surprising strength. By the time They reached the sanctuary, a place of breathtaking, wild beauty, where ancient stones hummed with pure elemental energy, and the very air seemed to breathe with life. Alec was beginning to rally, the pure energies of the glade slowly counteracting the foul poison in his veins. More importantly, Talia felt a strange sense of homecoming here, her own nascent elemental sensitivities singing in response to the glade's vibrant power. In the quiet that followed, their arrival, while Alec rested and recovered under the care of his pack's healers, Talia's mind raced. The lost texts, the proof of Graham's villainy, gone. But then, she realized something crucial. As the truth unraveled, in her memory, she understood that the knowledge wasn't just in the scrolls, it was in her, the feelings, the images, the core understanding of Graham's despicable plan and her own lineage's key role. That couldn't be taken from her. Because of that realization, a new plan began to form, desperate and incredibly high risk. When Alec was strong enough to sit by the sacred moon pool at the heart of the glade, its waters shimmering with captured starlight, she told him. "The texts are gone, Alec," she said, her voice low but steady, meeting his recovering gaze. "But I remember enough, and I felt what he's doing to those sites. Not only that, I think I know how to show others, how to make them feel his corruption." As her wolf stirred within her, a new confidence blooming, she outlined her idea. They would go to the Heart Spring, the most powerful elemental site in the territories. The one Graham undoubtedly planned to use for his final consecration during the upcoming celestial alignment he'd mentioned in his intercepted message. There, she would try to use her own elemental connection, her pure lineage link, to expose Graham's sacrilege directly, to let the land itself cry out against him. Alec listened, his expression growing more intent with every word. Despite that inherent danger, he didn't dismiss her. Instead, he saw the queen she was becoming. "It is a desperate gamble, my heart," he finally said, his voice still weak but firm. "Graham will have the Heart Spring heavily guarded. His power there will be at its peak. Even so, it may be our only chance. Our people will fight, but we need to shatter his image, his perceived legitimacy, before the other alphas, before the very spirits themselves. And then," he smiled, a true breathtaking smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "And you, Talia, you are no longer just a daughter of silvered light. You are the voice of the true pact, our voice." With a single glance, their resolve solidified. They would face Graham, not just as warriors, but as conduits for the truth. The open loop of how to fight without the physical proof was now closing, replaced by a plan born of her unique awakening power. What's worse, they knew time was short. The celestial alignment Graham awaited was only days away. So, preparations began at a frantic pace. Alec, though still recovering, gathered his most trusted warriors, his war council. Maps were studied, strategies debated. Talia, meanwhile, spent hours by the moon pool, trying to understand and tentatively guide the elemental energies that now sang in her blood, the healers of Alec's pack offering ancient, cautious guidance. She felt it, clear as day. Her connection was growing, a wild, untamed river threatening to burst its banks. The journey to the Heart Spring would be perilous, an infiltration into the very heart of Graham's power. No matter how hard she tried to quell the fear, it was there, a cold counterpoint to her burning resolve. As the sky darkened, on the eve of their departure, Talia stood with Alec, overlooking the hidden valley of the Whispering Moon Kingdom. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and the distant promise of snow. "Are you ready for this?" Alec murmured, his arm around her, his strength a comforting presence. Talia leaned into him. "I don't know if anyone can ever be truly ready for something like this, Alec," she admitted, her voice soft. "But I know I can't stand by and let him win. Not anymore." Her world tilted, from a place of reaction to one of determined action. The final push was about to begin, a race against time, against a tyrant, with the fate of their world, their love, and their unborn child hanging precariously in the balance. As the sky darkened, above the corrupted heartspring, the air itself thrummed with a sickening, twisted energy. Graham stood at the center of a vast, desecrated stone circle, his arms raised, his voice a booming incantation that clawed at the very fabric of the natural world. Shadows writhed around him, coiling like starved serpents. Truth be told, he looked less like an alpha, and more like some ancient, malevolent god demanding tribute. The celestial alignment he'd awaited, the one that would magnify his dark ritual, was beginning. The stars themselves seemed to weep a sickly green light. Before she could move, before raw terror could paralyze her, Talia felt Alec's hand tighten on hers. "Now, my heart," he breathed, his voice a low growl of pure, focused fury. "For our people, for the land, for us." And then they moved. Alec and his whispering moon warriors, phantoms of silver and shadow, exploded from their concealed positions, crashing into Graham's elite guard like a righteous storm. The clash of shifter forms, the snarls of rage, the shriek of corrupted magic. It was a maelstrom. Meanwhile, Talia, shielded by two of Alec's fiercest protectors, raced towards the edge of the ritual circle. Her goal was clear, desperate: disrupt the flow of elemental energy Graham was torturously draining from the heartspring, expose his sacrilege. Her body moved on instinct. Her nascent elemental abilities, so new, yet so deeply a part of her, surged in response to the land's agony. As if pulled by a string, she raised her hands, her voice, clear and strong despite the fear thrumming through her, crying out in the old tongue. The language of the true pact. Alec had begun to teach her. She wasn't attacking Graham directly with force. Rather, she was calling to the tormented elemental spirits bound within his corrupted circle, offering them a different path, a resonance of purity from her own untainted lineage. "Hear me, spirits of earth and water," she cried, her voice ringing with an ancient authority. "He lies! He starves you! He twists your power! Break free! Be whole!" Under the weight of his stare, Graham, momentarily distracted from his dark incantations by Alec's ferocious assault, turned his burning eyes towards her. A snarl ripped from his lips. "The conduit! Seize her!" But then, something shifted, as her wolf stirred. Not in a physical change, but in a surge of spiritual power. The ground beneath the ritual circle trembled. The sickly green light around Graham flickered, faltered. The tormented elemental spirits, hearing a call of true harmony for the first time in centuries, began to resist Graham's control. Vines, not of thorny defense like at the cave, but of pure, vibrant life, erupted from the poisoned earth, ensnaring the feet of Graham's sorcerers. A cleansing wind, summoned by Talia's desperate plea, swept through the circle, pushing back the cloying shadows. In that moment, Alec, seeing his chance, broke through Graham's personal guard. King against tyrant, alpha against alpha. Their final battle was primal, brutal. With every heartbeat, Talia poured her will, her newfound elemental connection, into unraveling Graham's dark magic, her voice a beacon against his hateful commands. Eventually, with a last defiant roar that ended in a choked gasp, Graham fell, his connection to the corrupted heartspring severed, not just by Alec's claws, but by the combined will of Talia and the liberated, enraged elemental spirits. As if the world narrowed to a single point of light, the oppressive darkness over the heartspring shattered, and a wave of pure, healing energy washed outwards. The core emotional question of where true belonging lay was answered not in words, but in her very being. She belonged here, with Alec, a guardian, a queen, her untamed self finally, gloriously, free. What followed was a stunned, sacred silence, broken only by the weary panting of warriors and the gentle sigh of the now cleansing wind. As the echo faded, from the last clash of battle, Alec, bloodied but victorious, came to Talia's side, his eyes filled with an awe and love that mirrored her own. In the stillness that followed, they simply held each other, the rising sun painting the recovering heartspring with the first clean light it had seen in ages. The immediate aftermath was a blur of activity. Wounded were tended. Graham's remaining bewildered forces were disarmed and taken captive. Alec and Talia, standing together, addressed his people, and the few representatives from other smaller packs who had secretly allied with them, their voices filled with grief for the lost, but also with a fierce, unshakable hope. More importantly, the land itself seemed to respond. The sickly green tinge around the heartspring began to recede, replaced by the tender shoots of new, healthy growth. It felt as if the forest watched and approved. Difficult decisions lay ahead, of course. What to do with Graham's vast, now leaderless territories? How to begin healing the deep spiritual wounds he and his ancestors had inflicted? But for now, there was relief, exhaustion, and a profound sense of a monumental task begun. Come morning, and many mornings after that, a new era dawned for the Whispering Moon Kingdom and its allies. Months later, Talia stood beside Alec on the highest peak of their hidden kingdom, looking out over valleys that were slowly, surely breathing again. The air was cleaner, the rivers sang a brighter song, and the elemental spirits whispered not in pain, but in cautious, growing harmony. She was visibly pregnant now, her hand resting protectively over the gentle swell of her belly. Her life had tilted from a gilded cage to this wild, beautiful, and sometimes terrifying freedom. Because of that, she had never felt more alive, more herself. Alec's arm was a warm, steady presence around her. Their love, forged in terror and truth, was the bedrock of this new world they were building. Peace, acceptance, a future. But then, as they prepared for the festival that would celebrate both the land's healing and the impending birth of their heir, one of the oldest lore keepers of the Whispering Moon, a wise woman with eyes like ancient river stones, approached them. Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke, not of joy, but of an old, almost forgotten prophecy tied to children conceived under the volatile magic of a red moon. "My king, my queen," she began, her gaze sorrowful yet resolute. "The child you carry is a gift of the red moon, a vessel of immense elemental power, destined for an extraordinary, perhaps perilous life." As the silence roared around Talia's suddenly tight chest, the lorekeeper continued, "But the old claims, they whisper a warning. To grant such power, the mother's spirit may be the dawn's first loan. The child's life force, it may be intrinsically tied to your own, my queen. Its birth, or its early years, might demand a sacrifice." Her breath caught. The joy of her pregnancy, so pure, so profound, was now shadowed by this chilling ancient legacy. A cursed child, or one whose very existence threatened her own life. In the quiet that followed, Alec pulled her closer, his strength a bulwark against the sudden fear. Their greatest happiness, their most profound symbol of victory and love, now carried the seed of their next, perhaps most personal and heartbreaking challenge. And just like that, everything changed. Again. Their hard-won peace now tinged with a new, deeply poignant apprehension as they faced an unknown future. Together. Epilogue. 5 years later. The Whispering Moon Kingdom wasn't quite so hidden anymore, was it? Truth be told, it had become a beacon, a sanctuary, where the land breathed free, and the elemental spirits sang their true, wild songs without fear. Autumn painted the high valleys in hues of gold and fiery crimson, the air crisp with the scent of pine, wood smoke, and the joyous bustle of the Great Harvest Festival, a celebration reborn under King Alec and Queen Talia's reign. Because of that hard-won peace, laughter echoed where once only silence and sorrow had dared to tread. Talia stood on the veranda of their royal lodge, a simple but strong structure built of living wood and ancient stone. Alec's arm a familiar, comforting weight around her shoulders. Before she could move, to speak, a small whirlwind of dark hair and impossibly bright, silver-flecked eyes darted past them, chasing a flurry of wind-tossed golden leaves with shrieks of pure, unadulterated delight. That was Lyra. No, not her attendant Lyra, but their Lyra, their daughter, the child of the red moon. Moments later, as little Lyra giggled, the leaves she chased suddenly danced with a will of their own, swirling into a perfect, playful vortex around her, before scattering again at her command. As if pulled by a string, both Talia and Alec smiled, a shared look of love, pride, and that ever-present, gentle watchfulness passing between them. The child was extraordinary, full of untamed elemental power that sparked from her tiny fingertips like summer lightning. Her mood sometimes shifting the very weather in their valley. The old lorekeeper's words about the Red Moon legacy, the mother's spirit may be the dawn's first loan, had haunted Talia through her pregnancy. But then, Lyra's birth, though an elemental tempest that had shaken the kingdom to its core, had not claimed Talia. Instead, it had forged an even deeper, almost symbiotic connection between mother, child, and the awakened land itself, as if Talia's own elemental heart had become the anchor for her daughter's wild, nascent power. She felt it, clear as day. A part of her flowed in Lyra, and a part of Lyra's untamed magic resonated within her own soul. "She grows stronger with every season, my love," Alec murmured, his voice a low rumble against Talia's ear, his gaze soft as he watched their daughter. Deep down, she knew the truth of his unspoken words. Stronger, and perhaps more of a beacon to those who might still covet or fear such power. The remnants of Graham's corrupted followers, though scattered, were not all gone. And the whispers of a cursed Red Moon child, one destined for a perilous, world-altering fate, had a way of traveling on the wind. Because of that, their peace was not complacency. It was a vigilant, loving guardianship. "She does," Talia agreed, leaning into his strength. "And she has your eyes when she's about to cause mischief. More importantly, she had their combined love, a fierce protective wall around her unique destiny." And that night, after Lyra was asleep, her small hand curled trustingly in Talia's, her dreams no doubt filled with dancing leaves and whispering winds, Talia and Alec sat by their hearth. The firelight cast warm, dancing shadows on the walls, a stark contrast to the cold, desperate nights in that storm-bound cabin so long ago. As the silence stretched, comfortable and profound, Alec took her hand. "The lorekeeper also said," he began, his voice thoughtful, "that such children are not cursed, Talia, but marked by fate for extraordinary lives. Our Lyra, she is the future. A future where the elemental pact is not just remembered, but lived. Still, the weight of the prophecy, the hint of potential sacrifice or great trial never truly vanished. It was a quiet undercurrent to their joy, a reminder of the delicate balance they now championed. Even so, looking at Alec, at the love and strength that radiated from him, Talia felt no fear, only a profound, unshakable resolve. "What's worse" was not a phrase that frequented their thoughts these days. Rather, what was best, what was true, what was next. The open loops of their past had, for the most part, found their closure. Graham was a dark memory, his corrupted legacy slowly being cleansed from the earth. The Whispering Moon Kingdom flourished, a testament to true leadership and elemental harmony. On the other hand, the journey of raising a child like Lyra, a child of the Red Moon, a child whose power already hummed with the ancient song of the cosmos, was a new story just beginning. No matter how hard she tried to imagine what trials lay ahead, Talia couldn't. But then, She didn't need to. As if fate whispered it on the evening breeze, she knew they would face it. Together. "She is our legacy, Alec," Talia said softly, her fingers twining with his. "Our love, our fight, our hope, all in one tiny, impossibly powerful package." He smiled, that breathtaking smile that still made her heart skip. And just like that, everything changed from fear of the unknown to an embrace of whatever destiny their unique family would forge. Together, under the watchful eyes of the ancient spirits and the ever-turning moons. Their belonging was here, in each other, in their child, in the wild, beautiful truth they had fought so hard to reclaim.